It's my pleasure and honor to introduce you to the MITRE Corporation's Early Career Research Program. For the past 3 years, MITRE has invested $1 million each year to develop science, technology, engineering, and mathematics leadership. Created within MITRE's Innovation Program, the Early Career Research Program helps develop critical leadership skills, including how to perform research, how to manage a research project, and how to communicate results effectively. The Early Career Research Program is highly selective, and each participant pursues a particular research challenge under the careful guidance of an experienced research mentor, often simultaneously pursuing an advanced degree. Many participants work half-time on the direct program, accelerating transition of their research to MITRE sponsors. Now in its third year, the program has contributed to the development of 20 extraordinary individuals. Prior participants have had their work externally recognized, for example, as best papers at conferences, and even acquiring direct funding from the government. So, please lean forward and enjoy meeting one of MITRE's early career researchers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrei, and I was part of the FY14 ECRP class. I spent the year in Rob Case's Data to Decisions portfolio studying social media analysis of mixed language tweets from the Philippines. So just before we get started, a little bit about me. I graduated from William & Mary in 2010, and I studied anthropology, math, and playwriting. And then a year later, I came over to MITRE, and I'm currently in K83A, the Department of Cognitive Sciences and Artificial Intelligence. And I'm right now in the middle of my master's in communication, culture, and technology at Georgetown University. I like taking pictures with statues, as you can see. Down here is a picture from my most recent trip, actually. I'm shaking hands with General MacArthur. This was in the Philippines, and I was graciously funded by Rick Shambi to attend a conference on international disaster management. And I took the initiative while I was there to visit the island where the typhoon hit the Philippines. So this is from that island. So the problem space that we're looking at has to do with the social media landscape. And this project is part of the Social Radar project. So Social Radar is a platform and a vision for monitoring, detecting, evaluating, and forecasting the social media landscape. And you can see that a lot of the platforms listed here are primarily in English, and we think about using them in English. But we really need to ensure that we're not using any data to language. So there are a lot of non-English users on this site and content generated every day by people who speak something other than English. And there are lots of other platforms that we should be aware of. Mixi, RenRen, Facebook, all these things in Asia, Russia, and other parts of the world. So your next question might be, why the Philippines? Why is this a good candidate for study? So personally, I am half Filipino. My mother is from the Philippines, so this is a part of the world that is very near and dear to my heart. From a MITRE viewpoint and an academic viewpoint, the Philippines is a great candidate because of the languages they speak and the social media that they use and the climate that's going on at the time. So the Philippines, the two major languages are English and Filipino. And they are avid users of Facebook and Twitter. Number 8 in the world for Facebook, number 10 in the world for Twitter. So there's a lot of content. There's also a lot of political instability that's going on, riots, coups. There's terrorism in the South, violent extremism. And what I ended up studying, natural disasters. So this started October 1st, 2013, my project, and then on November 8th, 2013, Super Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines, also known locally as Yolanda. And so this was the deadliest typhoon in Philippine history. And the topic of my research switched from just looking at violent extremism to natural disasters. So the questions became, what are the topics that people discuss on Twitter in the context of a disaster? And how are they discussing them? What languages are they using? What emotions are present in these languages? And do they differ across languages? And do topics differ across languages? So a really high-level overview here of the methodology that we used. So first we obtained a corpus, high-frequency word corpus, from articles, tweets, blog posts, and we went through them for Filipino words, and we translated these Filipino words automatically, and then we manually verified the translation with native speakers. These native speakers also helped tag the words based on sentiment and other emotional tags. And then this second phase here of evaluating the dictionaries, two of the dictionaries, positive and negative, we developed ground truth based on the tweets for them. And then we compared the ground truth and the dictionary output to see how well they were performing. And if you're interested in this phase, I have a paper that you all can read. You can ask me about that afterwards. We then applied these dictionaries and other social radar tools to a Twitter data set of 1.2 million tweets taken over a 2-week period before and after the typhoon. We then conducted some content analysis and some breakpoint analysis and documented these results from this sociocultural lens and social science perspective. So the findings, content analysis with the tool Mimi revealed that the majority of tweets and posts were in fact in English, about 80%. A little less than 15% were in Filipino, and a little less than 5% were in both English and Filipino, where they code switched either the sentences and the words. And the themes are different across the languages. You can see that emotion is present in the top 3, but also in English there are more broadcasting messages. So we sort of characterize this as the broadcasting language. These were issues of warning, weather announcements, news articles. And in Filipino, there were a lot more patriotic statements and a lot of statements that had to do with actually a political scandal that was going on at the same time as the typhoon. So what exactly were the topics? Like what else was going on? What are some of the more interesting, juicy bits? So for, a great, polite conversation topic, religion. This was a surprising finding for us. I expected that religion-related words, and this is in English, religion-related words would increase after the typhoon, but in fact we see a decrease here. And what's going on is that prior to the typhoon, a lot of the religion-related words were in tweets that were prayers, and this was a way of people bracing themselves for the trauma. There wasn't much that they could do right now, so they were sending out a lot of prayers and messages of protection. And then after, when the typhoon hit, and then this, blew up on the international stage, the volume of tweets, of news articles and facts kind of increased, so it sort of pushed the religion-related tweets down. And so that's why we're seeing a difference, because now there are more tangible means of supporting folks. You can actually donate. And we also ran the breakpoint analysis on this and drilled into the tweets a little deeper. And you can see that there's a geographic difference here. There's a regionalist and nationalist flux as the typhoon is going on. So Pray for the Visayas is praying for a specific region of the Philippines. It would be like if we said pray for the Midwest, And then it goes back up to a national level, and then it goes to a city level, an island-specific level, and then a week and a half after the typhoon, it's back on nationalist tendencies. So that was one of our observations. And maybe we can think of religion-related words as a way to understand community cohesiveness and social cohesiveness, what's going on. Swear words, another great, polite topic. So what we have here are English swear words and Filipino swear words. We were able to compare both of these. And the volume of English swear words is higher than Filipino swear words, but we notice that they're also decreasing right after the typhoon hits. And there's a weird spike there in the Filipino ones, and I'll explain that later. But what's interesting is that prior to the typhoon, the English swears are actually embedded in Filipino tweets. So it's people code switching out for the English swear, because apparently that's a more efficient way to insult a typhoon. And so there's a lot of defiance and there's a lot of anger that you see here, but also a lot of humor. And that was another surprising finding. So English was also more diverse in the type of swears that they used, and they were also often contained in news articles. A big retweet was a headline from CNN that said, Typhoon Yolanda is worse than hell. And in Filipino, the topics that they tended to talk about were expressing outrage over how the victims were treated. So they're, to use a Filipino word, kababayan, they're countrymen. So it's something that's closer to them. And the use of humor was a lot of Filipinos saying, I wish that this politician would get blown away by the winds. And so another thing that's important to keep in mind is that we're not looking at the victim's response on Twitter. We're actually watching the nation watching the victims and watching what's going on the ground. And we're seeing this in a national context. And this spike here on the bottom graph for Filipino, I feel like it's a good reminder that Twitter is a place full of jokes and petty gossip, because basically it was an internet celebrity yelling at another Twitter user and publicly shaming them, but in Filipino. So still keeping these cultural norms and this sense of shame and scolding and face within people who are part of their community. So professionally, spending a year working on this research was fantastic. I was able to support some of our sponsors and also present some of this material outside. So one of the things that was created was a disaster dictionary in Filipino and English terms from the typhoon and from other disasters that were commonly used. And this was added to our sponsor experiment. This was then able to be written up and presented at the European Association for Computational Linguistics. And some of this information and then more broad overviews on social media analysis were presented to the Cultural and Regional Knowledge Expert Group from the ODNI. And then these dictionaries, there were additional ones created. All of these together are now present in the Social Radar tool set. So we have them, and we have these multilingual social media capabilities. And one of the things just about working on this project, it made me realize that when we talk about MITRE as working in the public interest, that also includes sort of the international public interest. So it was amazing to see this on a more global scale. And personally, you know, I'm very interested now in this area of social media analysis and also disaster studies, specifically in, you know, Southeast Asia. As Richard was saying with the raw material, I think it's being refined and being pointed in directions. So it's nice to use the ECRP as a way to navigate what's going on. And my advice for, you know, current ECRP students, and I know I see some of you out here, and I'm sure there's some of you listening in, when you can, it's great if you can double up the work. Because I did this in conjunction with grad school. Karine Megardumian was my advisor and my professor, and I was able to do an independent study on sentiment analysis that really worked with the early career research project. And what was also helpful was having this kind of quality control as I went along, having someone go and look at it and say, you know, you're on the right track. And the peer review process also helped. You know, Alison Dingwall and Les Survey are reviewing like the results that you just saw here about religion swears and some of the other topics going on in the typhoon. So, and my other piece of advice is that you should leave some room for the MIP process come February and March. Use some of your time to write up a proposal and to talk to people and to submit that into the system, because it was very worthwhile. Special thanks. There were a lot of people who helped me on this project, especially my judges, Maria, Cheryl Ann, Liza, Carl, and Raisa. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to translate anything. They served as really great subject matter experts. Alison Dingwall, my wonderful mentor, and Beth Elson and Karine Megardumian for also providing a lot of quality control and peer review along the way. So, maraming salamat po. Thank you all very much, and I will now take any questions you might have.
Yeah. Okay, so actually I'm just asking if there were any other analyses that you did that you didn't have time to present in this talk about the content. Maybe you could highlight one or two. Yeah.
We also looked at anxiety and sadness and death-related words, all in English. And I think we found that anxiety increased after the typhoon as well as sadness, but it was not a very uniform increase, so it was kind of oscillating around back and forth. And the death-related words also increased after the typhoon, which was expected because there were a lot of news articles talking about the death toll and things like that. There's some interesting things about using English indicators on Filipino language sets because we wanted to look at anger also, but it was the dictionaries were picking up on a Filipino word that has nothing to do with anger, so we couldn't look at that. But
And I'll just say some of the work that's been done on use of social media in these kind of crisis events has looked at how it functions. So are you getting more information kind of dissemination versus the community solidarity kind of aspect? I guess you didn't have a chance to look at those kinds of things.
I'm glad you bring that up because when I visited the Philippines last year, some of my friends told me that Facebook was a real big thing that people used. And she said directly that Facebook became a radio because people could post a lot more different types of content. And when I was last in the Philippines a few weeks ago, I met some researchers who are doing research on exactly this, information dissemination during the typhoon. And they said, we are so glad that you are studying Twitter because we didn't get to do it. And they are looking at that. And I've heard that other types of social media like Instagram and YouTube were also used a lot by the victims. So
that was a really interesting talk. I wanted to ask about abbreviations in Tagalog. So I'm Filipino too, and I've texted with my aunts from the Philippines, and it's tough to decode what they mean sometimes because they take the vowels out almost randomly. Like so, you're not quite sure like how to interpret it, and so I usually like pass it off to like my mom, and I'm just like, what is she trying to tell me? So, and I feel like there's that, and there's also puns. Filipinos love puns, and so like sometimes they'll kind of speak in it. And I wanted to ask if you kind of ran across these, especially in Twitter, where like the character set is like limited to like 140.
Yeah, that's also a really good question. There were definitely tweets about like puns about Typhoon Yolanda that I couldn't decipher, and I had to ask the judges to do that. But I think a lot of the puns and abbreviations would have probably been in the small tail of the distribution. And what I was looking at was the Mimi content analysis, which sort of clusters the main topics. So by looking at one cluster, it let me look at like 3,000 tweets. So I kind of focused on the big ones, but those puns and those abbreviations were definitely present and kind of annoying to go through. So yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead. So I was wondering how you interpreted. It looked like there were a few cases where, in addition to the words, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say there was a little bit of ASCII art as well. So how did you run into much of that, and was that taken into account at all?
Unfortunately, I was not able to take that into account, at least in the automation process, because they also use a lot of emojis, and which are like special characters, and so that got stripped from a lot of the tweets. But I would like to look at that in the future, because that did come up a lot, and there's, I think, a difference between like Asian emoticons and like what is used in the Western world as well. So